Two men, a mustache apiece, and nearly 60 years of history between them. When Tom Selleck talks about Sam Elliott today, he doesn't reach for Hollywood platitudes. He talks about him the way you talk about a brother. And at 81 years old, with his signature TV role finally behind him, Selleck has been more open than ever about what that friendship actually means to him. This is the story of how two of the most recognizable faces in American film and television became, and stayed, genuinely close, and what Selleck has said about it now that he's looking back on a career spanning more than 5 decades. Two young actors, one crowded industry. Long before either man was famous, they were just two working actors trying to get noticed in a business that wasn't paying much attention to them yet. Tom Selleck was born in Detroit in January 1945 and raised largely in Southern California after his family moved to the San Fernando Valley. He landed at the University of Southern California on a basketball scholarship, studying business, with no real plan to become an actor. That changed almost by accident when a college acting class turned into a passion, then a profession, then a career that would define his life. Sam Elliott's path started differently but ran on a parallel track. Born in Sacramento in August 1944 and raised mostly in Oregon, Elliott studied at the University of Oregon before drifting toward acting himself. He made his film debut in 1967, a year before Selleck's small-screen debut, and spent the years that followed doing what most young actors do, taking whatever roles came his way and hoping one of them would stick. Their paths crossed early. According to numerous accounts from both men over the years, the two first worked together in the late 1960s on the television series Lancer, appearing in the same episode before either of them had any real name recognition. It wasn't a meaningful moment at the time, just two young actors sharing a set. But it planted the seed for something that would take a full decade to bloom into a real friendship. The westerns that built a brotherhood. The relationship deepened in 1979, when Selleck and Elliott were cast alongside Jeff Osterhage in The Sackets, an NBC miniseries adapted from 2 Louis L'Amour novels. The three actors played Sackett brothers from Tennessee, thrown together after a family tragedy and pulled west into the kind of rugged, open-country storytelling L'Amour was known for. Filming a western means long days on horseback, dust, heat, and hours of downtime between setups. The exact conditions that tend to either wear down a working relationship or cement it. For Selleck and Elliott, it cemented it. 3 years later, in 1982, the trio reunited for The Shadow Riders, another L'Amour adaptation, this time centered on two brothers reuniting after the Civil War to rescue kidnapped family members. By the time it aired, Selleck's career had already been transformed by Magnum P.I., which had debuted on CBS in December 1980 and turned him into one of the most recognizable faces on American television. That he chose to go back and make another Western with Elliott while Magnum was at its peak says something about where his priorities were. He wasn't chasing more exposure. He was choosing to work with a friend. Different trajectories, the same friendship. Once Magnum P.I. took off, Selleck's career moved at a different speed than Elliott's. He became one of the most bankable stars of the 1980s, won a Golden Globe, picked up multiple Emmy nominations, and starred in 3 Men and a Baby, the top-grossing film of 1987. Elliott, meanwhile, built his reputation more gradually, turning in memorable supporting and character work in films like Mask, Roadhouse, and Tombstone, where he played Virgil Earp. He was constantly working and constantly respected, but he wasn't chasing the same kind of mainstream stardom, and for a long stretch of their careers the two men were operating on very different scales of fame. What's notable is that the friendship didn't need equal fame to survive. Both men have talked over the years about preferring a quiet, private life over the more performative side of the industry. Selleck bought a large ranch north of Los Angeles in the late 1980s and has spoken often about how much he prefers ranch life to red carpets. Elliott, married to actress Catherine Ross since 1984, has kept a similarly low profile outside of his work. Two men who valued the same kind of privacy found it easier to stay close, even while their careers pulled them in different directions. When Elliott showed up for his friend. The clearest recent evidence of how deep this friendship runs came after Blue Bloods ended. Selleck played NYPD Commissioner Frank Reagan on that CBS drama for 14 seasons, and the show became the anchor of his working life for well over a decade before it wrapped its run in December 2024. Losing a role and a routine like that after so many years isn't a small adjustment, and reports through 2025 suggested Selleck was struggling, reportedly gaining weight, pulling back from his usual habits, and having a hard time finding his footing without the structure the series had given him for so long. That's when Elliott stepped in. According to reporting on the situation, Elliott, who has spoken candidly in interviews about knowing exactly what it feels like to sit around Hollywood waiting for a phone call that doesn't come, calling it a frustrating and often demoralizing part of the business, reached out to his old friend. Sources described him as wanting to reconnect, maybe get Selleck moving again physically, maybe just spend time together with the simple goal of pulling him out of a rough patch. It wasn't a publicity moment. There was no reason for Elliott to do it other than genuine concern for someone he'd known for close to 60 years. Selleck, for his part, has credited his wife, Jilly Mack, with helping him find healthier habits again, and reports have since pointed to renewed energy around potential future projects, including talk of a Jesse Stone continuation and conversations about where the Blue Bloods universe might go next. What Selleck actually says about him now. The most direct evidence of how Selleck feels about Elliott doesn't come from an insider or a tabloid source. It comes from Selleck himself in his own 2024 memoir, You Never Know, co-written with journalist Ellis Hennigan. In a book built around the people who mattered most to him across 50 years in the business, Selleck singles out Sam Elliott by name, placing him in the same company as Frank Sinatra and Carol Burnett as one of the defining friendships of his life. He's also written about first getting to know Elliott back in the 1960s, describing him at the time as a lanky guy with a deep voice who already seemed to know exactly who he was and what he wanted out of the work. A description that reads less like a passing memory and more like genuine admiration for a friend he recognized as something rare, even before either of them had made it. That admiration has shown up consistently in interviews too. Selleck has talked about respecting Elliott's consistency, his refusal to cut corners, and his instinct to pursue serious, character-driven work rather than the biggest paycheck available. It's not hard to see why those qualities resonate with Selleck specifically. He's built his own career on a similar instinct, choosing steady, character-based roles over flashier opportunities more than once, including the well-documented decision to stick with Magnum P.I. rather than take the lead in what became Raiders of the Lost Arkansas. When Selleck praises Elliott for those choices, he's effectively describing the values he holds for himself. There's also something to be said about how both men have handled aging in an industry that isn't always kind to older actors. Elliott's performance in 1883 reminded audiences and critics alike that he'd only gotten more compelling with age, that decades of lived-in experience showed up on screen in ways a younger actor simply couldn't fake. Selleck has spoken about wanting the same thing for the next stage of his own career. Continuing to work, continuing to find roles that draw on everything he's accumulated rather than roles that ask him to hide it. His interest in eventually working with writer-producer Taylor Sheridan has come up specifically in the context of wanting one more project alongside Elliott, which suggests he sees his old friend as something like a model for aging in this business with dignity intact. Part of what makes the friendship feel so believable, rather than just a well-worn press tour talking point, is how consistently both men describe it the same way, decades apart and in completely separate interviews. Selleck isn't the only one who has spoken warmly about the bond. Elliott, never someone who hands out praise casually, has referred to Selleck as one of the steadiest people he's known in an industry that doesn't reward steadiness very often. Neither man has ever needed to manufacture a story about the other, because the story was never really about publicity in the first place. It was about two guys who happened to book the same guest spot on a forgettable 1960s Western who kept running into each other, and who eventually realized they valued the exact same things. The work itself, the people who did it honestly, and a life that didn't require constant performance once the camera stopped rolling. That shared outlook also shows up in the kind of characters both men gravitated toward across their careers. Neither built a reputation on villains or shock value reinventions. Both became known for playing men who were flawed, sometimes stubborn, occasionally slow to open up, but fundamentally decent underneath it. Audiences responded to that consistency for decades, in a way that the industry's more attention-grabbing stars often can't sustain once the initial buzz fades. It's not hard to see why two actors who built their careers on that same quiet reliability would end up building a friendship on it too. A friendship built on something simpler than fame. What stands out about how Selleck talks about Elliott is how uncomplicated it is. He isn't vague about it and he doesn't hedge. He said plainly that he loves him. For a man who has spent more than 50 years in an industry built on performance, that kind of directness carries weight. It's not a line delivered for a camera. It's a fact he's comfortable stating because it's simply true. As of 2026, Selleck's net worth is estimated in the tens of millions, built across acting, producing, and real estate over a career that began almost by accident. Elliott's is smaller by comparison, the product of decades of steady, respected work rather than a single blockbuster run. But that gap in fame and fortune has never been the measure of what these two men mean to each other. From a shared scene on a forgotten 1960s Western series to a phone call meant to pull a friend out of a hard year, the through line of Selleck's career, by his own account, was never really the roles. It was the people who stuck around. And at 81, Sam Elliott is still near the very top of that list. If you enjoyed this look at one of Hollywood's most enduring friendships, let us know in the comments which Selleck or Elliott role you remember most, and whether you think the two of them might still end up sharing the screen one more time.